Is let's look at this for a second, and then we'll get off. Oregon still won this game by 22 points. They're 4-0, and they're first in the Pac-12. They have the best record in the conference. They're the highest ranking in the conference. And the fourth week of the college football season, 6 top 25 teams lost, 2 top 10 teams lost. Other top 10 teams that played today struggled. Oklahoma only beat West Virginia at home by 3 points, 16-13. Colorado State almost beat Iowa. At Iowa, they lost 24-14 to the Hawkeyes. Penn State played Villanova at home, and they won 38-17. Clemson went on the road to NC State, and they lost. Texas A&M lost to an undefeated Arkansas team that was 16th in the country. And my point is a lot of teams in the top 25 lost. Mm-hmm. And some top 10 teams lost, and other teams are not looking good. I think it's clear Oklahoma the last couple of weeks is not they are far from being a top 5 team. They are ranked that high because of name and because of preseason ranking only. Are we buying that Oregon is the number 3 team in the country right now? I wrote an article on duckterritory.com saying, like, we've seen spurts of it where they truly look like a top 5 team, a top 3 team in the country. But their issue has been the lack or the inconsistencies of playing down to their competition. I mean, they have said it themselves that they've played down to this competition. So is Oregon overrated, or do you feel like looking around the country in college football, there's Alabama, there's Georgia, and then there's a big gap between the next tier of teams, and Oregon's the best team in that second tier?
I mean, I saw a lot of the narrative being – oh, what was that?
No, you go.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say I saw a lot of the narrative being pushed on social and on Duck Territory of like, oh, this does not look like a top 5 team. Give me teams that are better. Give me teams that are playing better. There's just not a lot of them right now. And I'm not discounting the fact that maybe this doesn't feel like in a traditional year a top 5 team. Maybe that's fair. This is a really bad Arizona team in Oregon. This is a team that Arizona's lost 16 straight games. They just lost to an FCS team, and Oregon was up 5 in the fourth quarter. That happened, right? Like, you can't discount that. That's not a thing you expect to see from a team ranked 3rd nationally. Like, no one would argue that. At the same time, like Matt just ran through on a lot of that. And then if you want to look deeper at some of the resumes, like, there's more evidence of it. Like, there's not really like a clear team that I would say like certainly is better based upon results this season. Like, if you want to look strictly at results, like, Oregon's beaten 2 ranked teams. They've won their other 2 games by at least 3 scores. You can argue that neither were totally that impressive because there were moments in both where the game was closer than you'd like at that point in the game. But I have a hard time saying like this sort of team is overrated and doesn't belong in the top 5 just because I haven't really seen anyone else separate themselves from Oregon right now. I mean, Alabama and Georgia look like the class of the country, and even Alabama had hard times last week with Florida. And even Georgia, by the way, we hype up this win over Clemson. How good is Clemson? Like, what do we think of Georgia? I mean, I think there's not a team out there even right now. Like, I think Clemson and Georgia, Clemson stinks this year. Georgia and Alabama. Like, I think we think they're the best 2 teams in the country, but like, even they haven't looked like invincible. I think this is a year where it's just like pretty up and down. And so Oregon fans are rightfully kind of frustrated, but like, to suggest this team's not deserving of its ranking, I think is kind of unfair.
I agree. I think it's way too early to really have that kind of discussion. I mean, if you look at Oregon's wins with the win over Fresno State and Ohio State, literally what team in the country has better wins? Because now Georgia's win over Clemson doesn't matter. Literally just a useless win against a team that's in the top 17. We'll eventually find out how good this Oregon team is. I think there's still some part of me still feels like they're working out through the kinks, and they might actually come together and file down just a consistent lineup and everything like that come week 5 or 6. But it's hard because this year in college football is a mess. Just like look at this week. It's just mayhem right now. We can't make polarizing topics at all, basically on a week-to-week basis. Last week we had Penn State have an unbelievable game against Auburn, where everybody came out of that like Penn State, this is a top 10 team. They beat a top 15 Auburn. This was a great game, went over the SEC. Auburn almost loses today. What are we doing?
The Georgia
So-
Southern.
To Georgia State, or Georgia Southern, excuse me, where they were down like 24-12, just something crazy like that. They ended up coming back to win, but I digress. This is a very strange year of college football. We have probably one team that everybody would not like to play, and that's Alabama. I wouldn't want to play Georgia, so make that too. But everybody else is like fair game. There is that huge gap that Matt talked about where it's Bama, Georgia, and then Oregon. And I still think that if Oregon played either of those two, it would be a good game. However, I do think that at one point, I think one of the Southern teams would just steamroll Oregon, probably in the second half because of their just talent and size. But then you go down the list and it's like, okay, who else can put up any type of competition? Oregon's already done that. They went on the road, played number 3 Ohio State, and won without like 2 of their best defensive players. So to overhype them is easy at this stage in the season, but it's also very easy to say that they don't deserve that, even though they've already shown on paper and through their play that they do deserve to be a top 5 team right now.
Can I just make one more point we can get out? I also think it's really hard to judge Oregon and what its ceiling is as a team without having seen Kayvon Thibodeau play more than a quarter or so. I mean, he's played like maybe like a total snap count of like 1.5 quarters through 4 weeks of play. So
Maybe.
Let's see what it looks like when arguably the best player in college football is available for a full game. I mean, I think that's a really big component that everybody's frustrated. It's disappointing how these last couple of games have played out, maybe in terms of you want it to be cleaner. But like at this end of the day, Oregon's 4-0 going into a game with Stanford, and they haven't really had their best player play more than a quarter.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, more and more undefeated teams are getting knocked off. More and more top 25 teams are getting knocked off. And while we've been on this podcast today, tonight, whatever you want to call it, we've been on throughout the last couple of weeks talking about it. Oregon is blowing out their opponents. Who cares how they're getting there? The scores are showing 41-19, 48-7, a top 3 win at Ohio State, and then a 31-24 win against a Fresno State team that's now in the top 25 and probably the Mountain West Conference favorite to win their league. And some people are pushing them as a dark horse to make a New Year's Six bowl game. So they've played 2 really good teams. They've won both of them. They've blown out 2 really bad teams. And the journey to get to those blowouts have just unfortunately taken longer than it needed to. But the reality is they've now played 33% of their regular season schedule. And in 3 of the 4 games, they have had big stretches of time where they've not looked good. And at this point in the season, I think it's fair to say you're close to who you are going to be this season. There's still time to make big leaps and big jumps and improvement, but you've played a third of your season so far. And time is running out to come out and say that, well, they're still working through the kinks. They're still, improving. They're gonna make a big jump here in a couple weeks in time. Like, time is running out because they play Stanford this coming weekend. They play Cal the following Friday after a bye week, and in 3 weeks, Oregon will have played half their season. And at that point, you are who you are. And if it's Kayvon Thibodeau and other players are still dinged up and without injury, well, that's who you are right now. Like, you can't fall on the crutch that you have injuries because this is who you are. Because Eric, I do agree with you though. I'm not trying to say you're wrong because I do agree. Like, if Thibodeau is healthy, maybe this pass rush is there and third down conversions don't happen as often, and the ball gets back into the offense's hands, and with more opportunities, they score more, and it's a trickle down effect. But we're getting to that point where you are who you are, and you're running out of time to make some improvements. It's going to be interesting to see what falls out of this week leading up to Stanford. We'll be there, all 3 of us in Palo Alto for that football game. So make sure to be locked in on the podcast, on duckterritory.com, and also go to YouTube. Follow us there. Oregon Ducks on 24/7 Sports. And until then, until the next show for this podcast, you've been listening to the Odds and Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.